net present value is the most accurate and reliable method of project evaluation. It involves determining future cash flows, discounting them to a present value at an appropriate discount rate, and subtracting the initial outlay. The appropriate discount rate is the cost of capital. Whilst that's generally the case, it's not always true. There are some circumstances where it's not appropriate to use the weighted average cost of capital as a discount rate. In this and the next two modules, we'll look at those situations. If we are evaluating a project using NPV and using the cost of capital as the discount rate, then we are implicitly making certain assumptions, and if those assumptions are not valid, then we cannot use the WACC in those circumstances. The first of these situations is based on the fact that the cost of capital is determined by the required rate of return from the point of view of investors. This required rate of return is a function of the risk of investing in the firm. The greater the risk, the greater the required rate of return for investors. And the risk of investing in the firm is a function of the risk of its existing projects. So that leads to assumption number one, which must be valid in order for us to use the WACC as a discount rate. We are assuming that the risk of the project under consideration is equivalent to the average risk of the firm's existing projects. The second such assumption comes from the fact that the cost of capital is determined by the firm's capital structure. As we've seen throughout this module, it's not just a matter of calculating the cost of each source of capital, but we need to weight the cost of each source of capital by the proportion it makes up in the firm's total capital structure. On top of that, in theory, a firm should not have spare cash lying around. If they don't have any positive NPV projects, they should be returning the cash to shareholders, and therefore they will need to raise capital in order to proceed with the project under consideration. That leads to assumption number two. The most important aspect of the firm's capital structure is its debt to equity ratio, because debt and equity are so different. Therefore, if we use the WACC as a discount rate to evaluate a project, we are making the implicit assumption that the firm will maintain a constant ratio of debt to equity as it raises new capital to finance the project. The third situation arises from the fact that at high levels of debt, there are other factors other than the debt holder's required rate of return which impact on the firm, such as financial distress costs, extra costs to the firm if it's under financial distress, and bankruptcy costs. The weighted average cost of capital that we've been calculating does not take these factors into account. It is based purely on the debt holder's required rate of return and, of course, the tax rate. So the third assumption, if we are using the WACC to evaluate a project, is that the main effect of leverage is the tax deductibility of interest, that there are no other effects at current levels of debt.